So how do you make the perfect omelet? Who better to ask than the Executive Vice President of the Ohio Poultry Association, Jim Chakeres. We're here at OPA, just south of downtown Columbus. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Good to be here this morning. Good morning.
He's going to cook an omelet for us, and you know, I did bring my own pan, I brought my own utensils, but Jim said, let me just use mine, because it's like using another guy's tools, right?
Yeah.
You got to know what you're doing. But I did bring the eggs. It was BYOE this morning. Brandon Kern also joining us. He is Senior Director of State and National Policy with Ohio Farm Bureau. This is Policy Points, a chance for us monthly to get together and talk about some of the things that we're working on at the state and federal level as far as Ohio Farm Bureau and our partner organizations among the commodity groups go. And Jim, we're going to bring you in for a few of these because we have some overlapping conversations. But let's get to the question at hand. What is the top secret to making the perfect omelet?
The top secret is it's super easy. It's not challenging at all. You have to have the right recipe. And the recipe is pretty easy. You need 2 eggs and 2 tablespoons of water. That's it.
All right,
and so we'll get started.
Go ahead and start whisking. I do want to introduce, we have our State Fair interns with us, Reagan and Carly, and they're going to be with us for the Ohio State Fair, taking over the Land and Living exhibit. And so they better know about Ohio's poultry industry. And so Reagan, I'll start with you. How many pounds of poultry in Ohio is produced every single year?
Over 526 million.
That's right. Congratulations, you win an omelet here in a couple of minutes. Carly, let's talk about eggs. In Ohio, every year, how many eggs are produced?
10 billion, Ty.
10 billion. We got a dozen of them right here. And
you got
Jim
it.
is whisking away. So you added a little bit of water to it already, or no?
I added 2 eggs, 2 tablespoons of water. That's per person per omelet. If you're obviously doing omelets for 4 people, you can do 8 eggs, and you do the math. 2 times 4. That's 8 tablespoons of water.
And we've got some cheese here you'll tell us about in a bit. Of course, bacon, which is going to be very important, and some butter here. We'll get to those ingredients in a bit. Reagan, I'm going to give you this here, and you can follow along as we go. BK, a lot of things happening here in Columbus. We're going to talk about policy-wise, including the capital budget, some important items in there for agriculture, including $72 million for what's called the Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory at ODA. Really the only one of its kind in the state. Tell us about it and about this funding and what it'll be used for.
Yeah, so the capital budget, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, $3.5 billion for not necessarily government operations, but all the facilities and infrastructure that go along with government operations. So the lab that you're talking about, one of those projects, really important to our industry. As we've talked about in the past, the current laboratory that the Department of Agriculture uses to track animal diseases is really outdated, pretty antiquated in terms of the equipment in it, and this is going to allow us to construct an entirely new facility, state-of-the-art facility that's going to be a tremendous asset to the agriculture industry here in Ohio.
And Jim, it's one of those things where it's important for our producers, yes, but also consumers. This is going to be a big deal for them as well.
Exactly. It all starts with a healthy animal, a healthy bird, and so that's where the ODA ADDL lab comes in. These facilities are needed. We've been through a round of avian influenza this year, and our laboratory is our first line of defense in that. We had a producer call yesterday with some birds that were off feed a little bit and sick, so we wanted to rule out avian influenza. So we rushed swabs to the lab to test. It was a holiday, but someone came in and we tested those birds, and thankfully they were negative, but it's important to act quickly to stop the spread of disease, and the lab is our first line of defense, as I said.
It will be a new state-of-the-art facility there at the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Reagan, get in here and see what he's doing here. So he's kind of folded things in the middle, and the liquid chicken runs to the outside until it's cooked. And now what are we adding?
Exactly.
Here?
I'm adding a little bit of cheese this morning. Happened to have some Bella Vitano on hand here.
Who doesn't?
Oh, who doesn't, We're going to add some bacon. I like to think as an omelet is kind of a commodity breakfast because you can fill it with whatever you want. And of course, we've got some good butter that we started with there. And we're just going to let this sit for a minute. And, it's kind of like pancakes. You're always a little bit nervous, will the first one turn out? But we're gonna.
So the first one's mine, in other words.
The first one is yours. So we're gonna let that sit for another minute, and then we're just gonna fold it over, and we're gonna slide that on a plate. And super easy, super quick. And you can impress your friends for those like summer brunches, and that Sunday brunch. Invite the in-laws over, and Ty cooks breakfast. So
I'm always trying to impress the in-laws.
There
trust
you
me.
go. Let me grab a plate and we'll get this finished up.
You know, this gets me excited, Jim, for the Ohio State Fair, which is coming up in just over a month. And you guys have a big part there helping consumers figure out things like this about how to make eggs at home. And really, they can enjoy this stuff at the State Fair as well.
You bet. We do have some food booths there, and so we're going to slide this out, and we're just going to flip it over, and we've got a beautiful looking omelet to start with. This one's a little brown for me, but like I said, it's the first one. Some people like that little bit of finishing there on their omelet, but you know, we'll whip up a few more and feed the crew here, but super easy, super delicious, and nutritious. You've got all the benefits of the egg and all the rest of our products in there.
That's awesome. So just talking about the State Fair and the Expo Center, we talked about the capital budget, $21 and some odd million going towards the Expo Center. And really, Jim, we've talked about this with your organization and other commodity groups about how that facility needs some upgrades, needs some renovations in order to keep it viable here in Columbus.
It does. You know, we look to the State Fair to provide several different things. Obviously, it's the expo, the showcase for agriculture in Ohio, and that's of utmost importance. But I look at it as a recruiting tool for future workforce for agriculture, and that's what's important. Those young people that are in the 4-H and FFA programs, but even more importantly, maybe some of the folks from an urban area or somewhere that aren't familiar with agriculture. It's our opportunity to showcase to them the good that agriculture brings. We're feeding people, we're clothing people. It's what we do, and it's a good, honest way to make a living, and there's plenty of jobs available. And I think the State Fair is a perfect opportunity to bring that to their attention.
And BK, these funds are really nice for the Expo Center to start these projects, but really it's just a start.
I think it's we could call it a healthy down payment, right? So there's a continuing effort called the 2050 task force that's looking at a long-term vision for the Expo Center and the State Fairgrounds. As that committee completes its work, you know, we know that it's going to take more resources than what's in this capital budget. But as they lay out their plan, hopefully the policymakers can follow through with a resource allocation to make that plan come to fruition in the future.
Another big deal that Farm Bureau had a hand in as far as what's happening in Columbus legislatively speaking is eminent domain.
Yes.
And every time we say those words, our members' ears perk. It's an important subject for agriculture and for rural Ohio as a whole. What does this new bill do, and what do you see next steps being with it?
Well, you know, I think it's important to know that we view eminent domain as a necessary evil, right? This particular piece of legislation isn't aiming to thwart development and progress. It's not meant to stop, you know, the economic benefit that comes from putting new infrastructure in the ground. We know that that's needed. I think what it is about, though, is having a fair process for landowners to participate in when there are issues. Some of the things that we think are really important for eminent domain is a landowner should get a fair price for the land that they are ceding and having taken away. And there should be a workable legal process for that landowner to be able to access, maneuver through if they do raise questions about, hey, am I getting a fair price? Or is the scope of this project actually necessary for completing the desired outcome? And those are two issues that we've run into, and landowners across the state have run into you know, multiple times, right? Am I getting a fair price? And is the scope of the project, you know, one of the things that is really frustrating for, I think, a lot of lawmakers, there's a couple court cases out there right now, is, you know, taking more land than what's needed to complete the project. So the scope of the project's larger, right? And a lot of times it's, you know, if you're thinking about a utility company, it's for convenience, right? So I may need a 100-foot swath of land to put in that transmission line or what have you, but we take a little bit extra than that so that we don't have to do tree maintenance for, you know, decades to come. Right? Just making it a little bit easier for that landowner. That's additional land taken out of production for this purpose, and they need to have a workable legal process to work through. And so that's what this bill is about. We are the only state in the nation that does not have a legal term called inverse condemnation. And inverse condemnation is basically, you can think about it as a one-stop shop for where you take care of all these issues. So one court considers the compensation, the scope of the taking, and both sides of the equation, right? From the entity that's taking the land or using the eminent domain, but it's also the access point for the landowner. Right now in Ohio, we have this convoluted process where landowners, if they want to challenge this, have to work in multiple courts with multiple judges. Multiple legal proceedings have to be filed in sequence in order to take advantage of that or even just challenge it. And we don't think that's right. We need to have a streamlined process, access through their local county court to take care of all those challenges and have that decision made in one place. And that's really the biggest part of the piece of legislation that we're talking about. And it's been introduced in the state legislature now, so we're excited about it.
I feel like you and I are doing all the work here, so let's bring Jim in a little bit on this conversation and talk about the Securities and Exchange Commission, which you wouldn't think would have anything to do with agriculture, but unfortunately here over the last month we've talked about it more than we ever have. And Jim, I know that it's going to be a challenge for you guys as well as we talk about poultry producers across Ohio and across the country with the SEC trying to learn more about what producers are doing at the local level, possibly about their what they're doing for climate change and emissions. Talk about this issue for poultry producers and what you guys are into.
Well, I think at the bottom line, obviously we work closely with our national organizations to work on that policy and how things develop, but I think the important message here is it's all about balance and how we can work with farmers to achieve that balance, to achieve that perfect climate change position for the farm, whatever that is, and how we can make it easy to implement and a simple solution to work through for the farms. And so, to me, that's what it's all about.
Of course, I know nationally they wrote a letter to the SEC about the concerns. BK, Farm Bureau here in Ohio, and the American Farm Bureau, also part of the comment period that ended on Friday of last week. What do we tell them?
So, a couple of messages here. First and foremost, we pointed out from our standpoint, we think that proactive measures for best land management practices that are already happening here on the ground in Ohio are going to help solve this problem in a much more effective way than any type of regulatory measure like this, right? So the SEC is talking about having publicly traded companies report their greenhouse gas emissions and their supply chains report their greenhouse gas emissions. We have so many farmers right now through our water quality efforts, quite frankly, that really have dual benefit. They have water quality benefit, but they also help sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of those best management practices we're already doing. We're being proactive here in the state. So point number one that we made is, hey, in Ohio, farmers are acting proactively to do this, and that's going to make a much bigger impact than any type of regulatory measure like this. Beyond that, we're concerned about that scope 3 portion of the proposal, right? Talking about having your entire value chain report to you as a publicly traded company what their emissions are. And that, for us, for one thing, the rules are written very vaguely. We pointed that out. So where does that stop? Does it go all the way to the farm? Is it every gallon of gasoline or diesel fuel that a farmer burns because they're a part of that supply chain? So the vagueness and the lack of clarity about what that scope 3 means, where it stops, is concerning, and the ramifications of that are going to be, particularly for mid and small size farms, compliance with that is going to be a real issue. Does that drive further consolidation in agriculture because those who have the resources to be able to come up with this compliance regime are able to make it and others can't? We pointed out farmers don't, unlike a lot of publicly traded companies, we don't have an entire compliance division set aside just for SEC regulations. And so it's got to be workable in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here, and the scope 3 portion of this proposal is definitely our greatest concern.
Moving now to federal issues, and we all have heard that we're in an inflation period. We see it at the grocery store, we see it at the gas tank. There are a couple pieces of legislation, one to help out agriculture as far as inflation goes, and one to help out food and fuel, and we'll talk about both of those in a second. But Jim, I saw you on TV a couple of weeks ago, and someone asked about the price of eggs, and I'll be honest with you, I paid about $2.69 for a dozen eggs, and that's the most I've paid in my lifetime since I've been an adult. I'm sure they've been higher in the past, but it's not all about the egg as far as inflation goes. There are other aspects of getting that egg to the grocery store that's going to cause that price to go higher.
Well, it is, and I think the first thing to understand is, like a lot of farm products, is eggs, and egg farmers were price takers, not price makers or setters. And so it's hard to really gauge what the cost of production is, like what you pay in the grocery store, because stores have used them as loss leaders for so long, or sometimes they pass along the cost to the consumer, sometimes they don't. And you know, these eggs, it's interesting to get to the store. Obviously there's a lot of feed that goes into it. Feed's the #1 cost of production. A lot of good Ohio corn and soybean meal goes into producing and feeding the hens and then producing these high quality eggs. But then we also have to think about, okay, we've got processing, which takes fuel and electricity and water. And then we have packaging, which the egg carton, you know, the vast majority of eggs that reach the consumer come in cartons. We package them a little differently for restaurants or even in a liquid product. But all of that takes packaging. And then we've got transportation to get it to the store. And you know, even sometimes when you may see that your store doesn't have product, whether it be eggs or whatever, that doesn't mean that local supermarket or whoever doesn't have the product. It's probably just sitting in a distribution center and can't get there, or perhaps they don't have labor or a workforce to get the product on the shelves. So there's so many different levels that go into that, and fuel prices and labor shortages hit every step of that along the way. And so it's a giant piece of the puzzle, and the most important one is the one that's missing. And so we've got to figure out how we can work with that, and it's kind of like create the new normal to work through the issue.
So BK, what's happening in Washington to help us out here?
Well, you know, I think a number of different efforts. Most recently, the House passed on a pretty much a party line vote, a bill that was kind of promoted as addressing ag inflation in a number of different areas, and there's certainly some good things in there that we would support from a policy perspective. So, you know, creating federal cost share for implementing nutrient management practices for one, and utilizing precision technology, again, back to our water quality issues here in Ohio, something that we're very supportive of. Increasing assistance for putting in blender pumps, so you can offer more biofuel at different places across the country. There was support in there for that. A permanent fix for the E15 issue, for summertime E15, that was in there. These are all things that we support. And then there are additional resources for poultry and livestock processing facilities. This has been something that we continue to hammer away on, the need to help promote increased capacity within the processing sector, and so something that we've been very supportive of. In the end, there's one provision in there that we have a little bit of hesitation about, though, and that's the Livestock Special Investigator provision. And the concern here is, and it's all tied to the Packers and Stockyards Act and enforcement of that. What we're concerned about is creating this special investigator, in the end, is probably just another layer of bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy that's already set up to do investigations related to the Packers and Stockyards Act. And is that going to be an effective way to address the issue? You know, we already have the Department of Justice doing an investigation with more on the beef processing side. USDA already has mechanisms to be able to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act. And so creating another special investigator, which by the way in this bill is not funded, it's not provided any additional funding. The real concern is, one, just another layer of bureaucracy that's gonna maybe not work well with the other entities that already have pretty much the same authority. And two, is USDA gonna have to siphon off resources from other parts of the agency to be able to resource allocate the special investigator's office. So I'm not sure that it's the most effective way. So in the end, we were neutral on the bill because we had remaining concerns about that provision, and questions that we had posed to USDA about it had not gotten answered before the House took action. So we'll see where it goes. It's still gonna have to pass the Senate, and you know, we'll see where it goes.
It's one thing, Jim, that people don't think about. You know, consumers, we see what's happening with inflation. We feel it at the pump, we feel it at the grocery store, but producers aren't immune to inflation. They're also seeing higher prices for just about everything it takes to produce an egg, to produce corn, produce soybeans. Think about the equipment cost. Think about the labor cost. Think about all the inputs that go into it at point A before it even gets to point B. There are things being done in Washington now that are going to be helping, hopefully, the farmer. But how are your producers handling what's going on with these higher input costs? How is it affecting the poultry industry in particular?
Well, I think it presents a challenge, and the producers are constantly looking at what cost savings they can implement. You know, salaries and wages have increased across the board. Costs of fuel and grain to feed our birds have increased, as you said. So we look for ways to become more efficient. And again, we hopefully can work with the folks that are setting the prices to make sure that, you know, there's nothing, as I've said many times, profit is not a bad word. And you know, the farmers wake up every morning and care for their hens and turkeys and chickens, and they want to produce that safe, affordable food. But they also have several people they employ that they have to pay. You know, they're responsible for several different families, including their own, and profit is what makes that happen. And so we need to realize that we're all part of the same system, and we need to figure out a way that it is equitable to everyone. And I think my word for 2022 is balance, and we need to figure out how we can balance all of these things together.
I think the words for 2023 are Farm Bill. We start talking about that now a little bit, and we're starting to hear some ideas come out about how to help those farmers with these input costs and inflation. And BK, I heard something about a margin protection program, maybe for the cattle industry, maybe for the row crop farmers. Is that something we could see down the road?
I think it's becoming an increasingly interesting topic of conversation in Washington right now. And you know, I think it obviously makes a lot of sense. You look at the dynamic we're facing right now in the farm economy, extremely high commodity prices, right? That's one thing. But we also have extremely high input costs and transportation costs and everything else. And you know, in the end, we have great price protection, income protection programs in place right now. But in an economy like this, where the concern could be those commodities, farm ag commodity prices move up and down much quicker than fuel and input prices, right? And the concern is, do we get to 2023 and commodity prices take a dip? You know, farm ag commodities take a dip, but those input prices, fuel prices, all those things are, you know, still high. And then you have loss of margin. And so an income protection program or a price loss protection program is not going to be as effective as providing that safety net for producers if that dynamic continues or if that dynamic plays out. And so there's increasing conversation. The House Ag Committee had a committee hearing just last week. Dr. Joe Outlaw from Texas A&M testified, and his recommendation to the committee is, hey, you need to be looking at this. Not necessarily saying we need to do it yet, but we need to explore it. And we have a similar approach in our dairy industry, our dairy sector already, where they have a margin protection insurance program. And so, you know, the thought process is, can we apply that same concept to row crops and other livestock producers? And so I think this is going to be something we're going to have to take a real serious look at.
Thank you both for being with us. This has been a lot of fun. And before we let you go, Jim, you also made us some deviled eggs, and we're getting into the midst of summer here. Picnic season, July 4th coming up. What do we have here, and can we find recipes for these somewhere?
You know, eggs all day is what our motto around here is. And we start with our omelet in the morning, and then we can have, you know, deviled eggs anytime throughout the day, all the way through entertaining. I like them because they're portable. If you're traveling with your deviled eggs, keep them in the cooler, put your whites in a resealable bag, and then put your filling mixture in a separate bag, and transport them that way and fill them when you get to wherever you're going, whether that be a reunion or a neighborhood party, and snip the corner of that bag, and it makes a little fun bag to pipe in, and then garnish your eggs and you're good to go. You're going to impress everyone. Today we've got tomato bacon ranch, we have got an everything bagel deviled egg, and we have a Bloody Mary deviled egg. So these are all recipes that are tried and true from the Ohio Poultry Association. All those recipes, ohioeggs.com. And you can also find out how to make a perfect omelet on there. And there's actually some videos that will show you step by step what to do.
Only missing one thing, a fork.
A fork?
Oh, yeah.
We've got that taken care of.
Okay.
This is what I've been waiting for all morning.
Jim Chakeres is Executive Vice President of the
Thank
Ohio
you,
Poultry
sir.
Association, and he is also our top chef today, and really can't thank you enough for hosting and
Oh, you're the man.
all you do for the industry, and this is just awesome. Policy Points with Ohio Farm Bureau. Brandon Kern is with us as well. He's Senior Director of State and National Policy. I'm Ty Higgins. We'll see you down the road.
Not good.
Awesome.